A mind can clear with a kind word. Yeah, a broken man can be whole again. If only someone cared. If you would only care. We are here by the grace of God. Oh, we found our place for now.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Bob Garrison, and I'm one of your welcomers to this event. I'd like to talk a little bit about WSSJ and what we intended for this event, how WSSJ came to be. And I'd like to point out that when I make remarks about the inception of WSSJ, West Sound for Social Justice, it refers to the last election, but it's not intended as a partisan representation. It's something that caused a number of people to get active. So on behalf of the WSSJ Executive Committee, the general membership, I want to welcome you to this event and talk just a little bit about WSSJ and what we hope might come out of it. As many of you may know, WSSJ is a fairly new organization. It grew out of a sudden awareness, that came to a few people. Most of them had strong feelings about social and economic justice issues already, and therefore necessarily about political issues, but most of whom had rarely, if ever, been politically active, and certainly were not regular activists. Oddly and coincidentally enough, the realization that they needed to get active hit them like a ton of bricks in late January 2016. The short version is that they got together, formed what they called West Sound for Social Justice, and started figuring out what to do and how to get other people in the same boat interested and involved. Today's topic is homelessness. Homelessness is a complex issue, but all of us understand that it should not be any issue whatsoever in the wealthiest society that has ever existed on the face of the earth. I am convinced, as I think most of you probably are too, that the awakening born of the 2016 election was in fact a twinge of pain resulting from deeper turmoil. That the wealthiest societies of all time could have this problem and other social problems that are probably equally pernicious was completely unacceptable. But the deeper question is, are we going to be a society that is a community that operates out of respect and concern for each other and all of our members, or are we going to be a society that emphasizes the advancement of a few at the expense of the many? The latter choice is neither moral nor sustainable. Some of us who are early WSSJ members and supporters have worked together to ask people with experience and knowledge about the homelessness crisis to educate us and our audience so that we can better understand that crisis and how we might participate in finding solutions. We are learners today with the rest of the audience. Sally Joe, who is one of the people who worked tirelessly to assemble this program and put it together, another early WSSJ participant, has more in conclusion of the welcoming remarks. Thank you.
Hi, and thank you all for being here today. The general welfare of all people is the focus of this forum. Most of us here gathered lack the personal or lived experience of being homeless. We also recognize for the vast majority of our neighbors, it's not because they chose that path. A combination of unforeseen circumstances could conspire to leave any single one of us homeless and without a safe space to call home. Today we're here to learn, we're here to seek empowerment in the face of tragedy. We'll hear from the service providers in local homelessness work as well as fellow community members who are currently or have previously been homeless. These are the leaders in this work. They know what it means to be homeless, and they know what it needs, how we need to address it. Our goal today is to focus on learning how to support them in their efforts. We'll also explore the mutuality between the housed and the homeless. We're tangled up together with systems that work for some and ruinously don't for others. How do we, the housed, leverage our privilege to promote the general welfare of all people? How do we effectively wrestle the complexity of emotions that come up when we see someone who is homeless? And then how do we tame those emotions into appropriate acts and actions? Clearly, money is a driving force in the measures to address homelessness. We would argue that heart plays an equally central role as we greet the marginalized among us with humanity. We're grateful to have a number of homeless and previously homeless neighbors joining us today. We afford you our respect and recognition that you are the ones who are living this struggle. We have a lot to cover in 2.5 hours. Our job is to keep things focused and on track, and you can help us with that. We want to reassure you that there will be time for questions after the second and third panels. Our time is short, so please be respectful. If you take your turn, don't hog the mic. Now, some thanks are in order. We're grateful to Marta, if I could see you out there, and the Bremerton United Methodist Church for your graciously supplying the venue, the bus transportation, and support beyond measure. And we want to remind everyone to turn their cell phones off. And we want to acknowledge and thank Josh Farley, who is here from the Sun to lead us today, and to Rick Cortez for the heartfelt and wonderful music intro. There are, I understand, some elected officials in attendance here today. I don't honestly have your names, I'm sorry, but thank you for being here. We also want to recognize those who planned the event and the army of service providers who are doing the work. Some among us have inclusion needs requiring standing or milling about during the time today, so please stretch your legs as required. And we'd be grateful if you could do so quietly so as to help the listening needs of all of us. We want to acknowledge that here at Bremerton United Methodist Church, we are in the traditional ancestral territory of the Suquamish people. We humbly honor the history of our tribal neighbors as the original occupants and protectors of this land. The promontory at the end of what is now Marine Drive has a tribal name which roughly translates as Deer Place. Suquamish tribal members lived in at least 2 villages on Dyes Inlet before contact with non-natives in the early 19th century, and they have been here in Kitsap County for thousands of years. This is a fundraising event. You have seen the basket out in the front and the bins, and we hope that you will help collect food and cash donations for Bremerton Food Line, Bremerton Backpack Brigade, and Stand Up for Kids. If you brought children, please see the activities station with parent helpers, and if you need the restroom, they're out here or out the back and down the hall. And let's see, I've been told to say there's a found phone on the registration sign-in table. We want to leave you with this adaptation of Martin Luther King's famous quote: "Homelessness anywhere is a threat to the housed everywhere." We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Now I'd like to introduce Josh Farley. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? There we go. Thank you, Sally Jo, for the introduction, and it's an honor to be here. I want to echo what she said just briefly to say welcome. This room full of people, I think, is really... I just want to say thank you to the folks that are here, because the fact that you are here to listen to this conversation means that not only are you interested, but we might see something happen out of an event like this, right? The more information that we all come together and bring together, the better we can end up as a result. So again, you should have all filled out, by the way, a card in the lobby area, which we're going to put together. There's also an index card that was on your chairs. Just keep those, if you wouldn't mind. Just hang on to those. We have an activity that will make sense. It will all make sense as we move down the line here. I want to do one more thank you to West Sound for Social Justice for hosting this event. Thank you. And also, Rick Cortez, my gosh, that was beautiful. He has the coolest voice. One more round of applause for Rick, everybody. That was awesome. Okay. All right. There may be some pictures taken during this event. I just want everybody to be aware of that, but they'll be coming from the back side. So we want to avoid having people's faces and respecting privacy. Our goal today is really threefold. Number one, deepen our awareness and the analysis around what is homelessness. This is a big part. So that's number one. Number two, build our capacity to continue to sustain this learning together. So sort of the snowball effect. We size up the problem, we know what it is, and we come together in a way that sustains this effort. And number three, connect the efforts to ones that are already underway, i.e. make the change happen. I think we can all agree that the epidemic of homelessness across the country and in our own community where it is acute is something that frankly, we have a serious problem with, or we wouldn't be here today. So our goal today is to give you 3 panels which will hopefully help us in the direction to accomplish those 3 objectives that I mentioned. Our first panel today is lived experience, our second is the scope of the problem, and 3 is possible solutions. So we are going to start now with our first panel, and I'm going to introduce each of our speakers, and then they are going to have 10 minutes each to talk a little bit about this, again under the umbrella of the lived experience. Our first speaker is no stranger to many of us who have read Breakfast at Sally's, and someone who has experienced homelessness, Richard Lemieux. Everybody, round of applause for Richard. Okay. Our second speaker is a volunteer for Stand Up for Kids, but the organization has done much more for her. This is Desiree Hamblin, who was homeless at age 13 and is now housed. And a round of applause for Desiree, everybody. And finally, closest to me is Gerald Harris. Grew up in San Antonio, Texas, moved to Bremerton and to the Puget Sound area in 2016, and he is currently experiencing homelessness. Welcome, Gerald. Okay, and so for our first, again, 10 minutes each, we will start with Mr. Lemieux.
Good afternoon. Everybody hear me? Can you hear me? Cool. It's wonderful to be here. First of all, I wanted to, do you know what the average age of a homeless person is in the United States as of today? 9 years old. That federal statistic, and amazing, 9 years old. And you were 13 when you were? Yeah, so you're persevering. You're persevering. Well, it's really apropos that you're having this event here because, I don't know, how many people here have read the book Breakfast at Sally's? That's good. That's good. Well, how come you haven't read my book yet? What's the matter with you? Just teasing. It's apropos because I lived in my car for 2 years. And the last 9 months of living without a home was in this church. I slept in here. I slept in the sanctuary. I slept behind the altar because I thought somebody comes in here and walks around, maybe the choir director, he wouldn't step on me. And I slept down in the narthex. I slept down the hall in every room. I slept in the Boy Scout room. And that was thanks to Pastor Earl Rice, who, when I came into this church after 2 years of being homeless and wanting to take my life, I came in here on a wet November day with my dog in my arms. He looked at me and said, "You need to get inside for a few days." And he said I could stay for 3 days, and I stayed for 9 months. I don't think he could get rid of, I think he could have gotten rid of me, but I don't think he would have kicked Willow out. Also, in this church right here, matter of fact, Willow was the only dog I've ever known that got communion. She took communion here when people would get online on Sunday, and the pastor would break off a piece of bread to hand it to the person, and as that bread would be broken off, the crumbs would fall on the floor. And Willow, she did her job. Pastor Rice said, because some people sort of, whoa, they went like that, and he said, it's okay, because that Willow's just doing her job, helping keep the church clean. Yes, it's going to sound a little bit like an advertisement here, but the book Breakfast at Sally's, I don't know if you know this or not, is the #1 selling book about homelessness in the last 8 years. Over 100,000 copies now. It's interesting. I bring that up because the face of homelessness is changing all the time. So the scholastic books that were done by the professor at, say, Penn State University about homelessness are no longer valid. Things are changing, and they're even changing faster than that now with the opioid problem, and now that's even creating more and more problems for people that become homeless. But again, as you look up here, you see 3 people that were homeless. I'm always amazed how people are afraid of us. Are you scared of me? No. Well, people said, I was afraid of you when you were homeless. I didn't know what to do or what to say. But that book has raised over $6 million for the Salvation Army nationwide, $3 million locally. It was the beginning, 3 members of the people who had read my book, Helene Nelson, Pastor Art Sprite, and Larry Cooney. I know where Larry Cooney is today. But, and Helene's in California too. That was the beginning of what they called the Bremerton Rescue Mission, which is now the Kitsap Rescue Mission. And there are now 6 homeless missions in the country named after my dog Willow. One in Kent, Washington called Willow's Place. One at a Methodist church, they've remodeled it and turned it into a homeless shelter in Dunkirk, New York, where 28 people live all year round. Let's see, there's several dinners, one in Walla Walla, one right here one in Silverdale, which many people here are probably familiar with, where they have a menu. You have 3 different entree choices, 2 different salads, and any kind of choice of soup. And they'll have 100 people this Tuesday night coming to that meal. So our society, if you will, is changing all the time. As you know, rents are going up. I'm on the board of the Bremerton Food Bank. When I go in there, people come in and say, I've never asked for food before, but my rent just went up $300 and now I can't afford to eat. That's a precursor for a possible person that will be homeless in next year. So, if I will, I'm going to pass this around. Rick, would you grab that? Reason I'm going to show this is important to note in this room, if it wasn't for the people in Bremerton, Washington, there's a man right there with his dog, and his dog is his friend. I'll pass this around, and on the other side you'll see a picture of me with John Glenn, the astronaut, when he was alive, and he introduced me to do a speaking event in Columbus, Ohio. The reason I show you that, if it wasn't for the people in Bremerton, Washington, and Silverdale, Washington, and various areas around here, Port Orchard too, I wouldn't be here today. I would probably be dead, because I tried to take my life once, and without somebody caring about me, I would have eventually succeeded. But thanks for everyone who saved my life, to be honest with you. Some of you gave me $1 maybe when I was in front of the 7-Eleven. Some of you were when I was in front of Safeway. You gave me enough money to get gas. If I could, importantly, this, as you know, homelessness is growing. When I was homeless, there were 4 meals in our city besides the Salvation Army breakfast and lunch. Now there's a meal every night provided by some wonderful person who says, we have to feed these people. And what's so important is can I borrow your hand, Desiree? Here. See this hand? This hand right here. You can pray to God for a hamburger all day long when you're hungry, but God will not show up. Whatever you picture God, some cloud in the sky that comes down and hands you a hamburger, it won't happen. But a lady like this, because I know that someday soon, if she isn't already doing it, she will use these hands to feed the homeless. It will happen. These are the hands. These are the hands. People say, well, these people that are homeless, it's their fault. And if you read my book, you know that there was some difficulty for me. Maybe I could have done this, or maybe I could have done that. But the point is, I didn't do that. And when I ended up on the street, I ended up scared, frightened, alone, knowing that nobody cared. Not one single person on the face of the earth, nobody cared. But you know what? People cared. I found them mostly because I had the most wonderful dog in the world leading me to them, but I found them, and that was people that are in this audience and people just like you in other places. I do a lot of public speaking everywhere. I spoke for the Housing Authority in Maine. I spoke for the Salvation Army in Orlando and San Francisco and many other places. My favorite place to speak is right here. Because I do a lot of speaking in our schools. I don't know how many people know that, but I do know this. Lisa, the teacher back there, would you stand up a minute? There you go. She invited me every year to come to speak to her class, and you know what? It's one of the most wonderful things I had a chance to do was to speak to those students. I try and speak at every high school and every alternative school. And twice a year at the Juvenile Detention Center. Juvie, they call it. Those kids need our help. And whenever you hear somebody say, well, this kid was in juvie, must be a bad kid, no. They just need help, need an understanding. I got 1 minute, so in that case, I'll read a letter just real quickly. Not the whole letter, but this is one of the speaking events I do in the schools. Remember now, the average age of a homeless person in the United States is now 9 years old. There are 40,000 homeless teenagers, or 40,000 school-aged children that are homeless in Washington State. But I spoke at Central Kitsap High School. Vashai Egbertson wrote this, said, first of all, I want to thank you for coming speaking to my class. Your story and your presence reignited my burning desire to help out in my community, right here. I hear of stories and have actually participated in travels to faraway countries to help people build a home or drill a well. This is good, of course, and I'm proud of that. But there are people right here in my own hometown that are hungry and homeless. So thank you for coming to my school. Thank you for telling your story and being selfless enough to share part of yourself in the aim of helping us take part in becoming a better community. And this is a community. This is the greatest crowd I've seen in Bremerton, of people coming together wanting to do something special. And just as I said, it's a fundraiser, so I do have a little box over there. Someone wants to help pay my way to schools and stuff. It's right over there. I'll go put it out front, so at the break. But remember, just don't go listen to us and then go home. That's not what this is about. We all have to come together to get people off the street. They can't live there. Women and children sleeping in their cars, This young person being homeless. This wonderful man being homeless. This has got to stop. And the only way to do it is for you to, when you go home tonight, think about what you can do. Can you call your church? Can you call the Salvation Army? Can you donate money? Can you donate time? And I see people in here that I know. Yesterday, that man was sweeping the floor at the Episcopal Church after they had a meal. So they're telling me I have to stop, so I'm going to. But I'm going to stop on this message. Please, when you leave here, think about what you can do, and then tomorrow, start doing it. Hallelujah.
Okay, it's all yours, Desiree.
Ooh-wee. Wow, am I close enough? I always speak better when I stand, but that was amazing. That's going to be hard to back up there. Anyways, I'm Desiree. I like to introduce myself, basically former student of Olympic College. I work with PCHS, although I am not representing them today, if that was not mentioned. Just my personal experience, thank you. Anyways, when I was 13, there was quite a mess that happened in my home, and ultimately it led me to be homeless. In the beginning, I was able to stay with friends, and kind of stay on the couch or hang out or whatnot, but ultimately it led to me staying and sleeping underneath the Manette Bridge on a slab of concrete. I slept in the Clear Creek Woods. I slept in a beach hut made of beechwood on the Silverdale waterfront. I tried to stay in Silverdale because I was going to alternative school at New Frontiers. Sometimes I would walk from Bremerton to Silverdale just to get that junior high education. At that time, Stand Up for Kids was one resource I was able to connect with. At that time, they were able to help me with monthly bus passes. They brought in food packs. They had clothing and whatnot I was able to have or utilize. Also, sadly, at that time, I didn't know we could connect with them directly. Yeah, it was all through more of the teachers and the administrators. If we needed help, we told them, and then they connected with Stand Up for Kids. So I think in that moment, I lost the ability to actually maybe make a connection that could have helped me overall. Sadly, I ended up in drug addiction. I was, started one place, moved to the other, cocaine, and then it was methamphetamine. And that's where I stayed, was with those people, because now at least I had shelter, right? There's food in the fridge, although I probably wasn't eating it most days. And there was a sense of belongingness. And I say those things because I ultimately believe in, thank you. Ultimately, is it working? Okay. Ultimately believe in Maslow's hierarchy. Favorite study ever. If you haven't read on it, read it. Every time I do one of these events, as I've done multiple times, I like to go back to that study. When an individual has not met the fundamental needs that they need, food, shelter, air, sleep, shelter, they actually will not participate in moving further in life or education or finding a job because they were so busy trying to meet those basic needs of life, okay? So then the second part is safety, right? So I didn't care that I wasn't safe at that time. I didn't care because at least I had my fundamental needs met, right? And sadly, at the age of, from 13 to 18 was, I think 14, 15 years old is when the drug addiction started. I was young. I mean, peer pressure alone with kids who do fight and don't become addicted to drugs is enough to teeter that, let alone the situation I was in. And shortly, I know I'm teetering.
Okay.
So,
You're doing good.
anyways, at that time, you know, I finally got to reconnect with my dad I was disconnected with, and by that time I was already gone. The best thing he could do for me was hit rock bottom. My experience as an adult homeless, I eventually met the father of my children. He helped me kind of get clean. Ultimately, what got me clean, I was clean for a month long, and I found out I was pregnant. I didn't go to treatment. I didn't go to NA. I just got clean for my child. The love for my child was enough, okay? So at that time, I was a stay-home mom, ended up pregnant again. He got in some trouble. He had gone to jail, and there I was, homeless again, right? I didn't have a GED, did alternative junior high, never went to high school. You know, I'm sitting here looking at myself like, what am I gonna do? Thankfully, I had, you know, ultimately fixed a few things with my dad at that time where I've proven that I'm not on these things. You know, I'm clean, I'm a mother now, I'm trying to do good, and so I was able to kind of stay with him for a while, and but ultimately there's a sense of burden you feel when you stay with someone else. You can't help pay bills, you can't help do these certain things, and they do eventually kind of break, you know, and so I ended up leaving my dad's and going to my mom's, to my grandparents, and thankfully I finally got called from Cedar Heights saying, hey, your name just came up on the income-based list, and I'm going, oh, thank goodness, because at this time I'm already in school. You know, I had passed my GED, I jumped from my GED, went straight into college. I was breastfeeding between classes, racing to Abundant Life from OC. So, I was racing to Abundant Life from OC to breastfeed my 4-month-old daughter and race back to go to a second class. And so finally, by my second quarter, I was able to get her to take a bottle, finally, you know, and except for when I was around, only when I wasn't there. And so then I picked up a part-time job, and I didn't, you know, ultimately I feel like at that time is my education. What pulled me out of being homeless was an education. And the resources, I was able to utilize TANF, I was able to utilize food stamps, I was able to utilize community resources at that time as stepping stones. And so, you know, and ultimately here, when we're talking about solving homelessness, I feel like it's going to be an endless cycle. You know, there's new problems that arise every day, there's a new picture every day that arises. But when we invest our time, our money, our resources into this problem of homelessness, we're not only investing in that family and those children that are now going to come up in a home instead of a car or on the streets, but we're also investing in our community and our economy. You know, it's not only that one person, we're helping our community, our economy. This person finally gets a shelter. They meet that safety level of the Maslow's hierarchy. Now they are starting to, where do I belong and who do I want to be? Now they finally get to look at that. Now they finally can make those goals, better their future, and ultimately better their children's future, to then come up in a different upbringing than their own, you know, and then become a tax-paying citizen. Somebody then turns around and becomes one of the helpers who's helping the next people come in line. And that's ultimately why I work with Stand Up for Kids, is because they were there for me, you know, and now I'm in a position where I might not always have all the resources I want to be able to give, but I give all I have, because I want to help that next teen. I want to help that next person. Every addict who comes through my doors, I share my story as a medical assistant, and I give them experience, strength, and hope. All of us have a story. All of us have met struggles. And our job is to listen to those stories and learn something, and to share our stories and teach something. And I really hope today that all of you guys can come together, and if it's just time, give that time. If it's just food in your pantry that you realize you haven't eaten in 3 months, give it away, you know? Or you go to church, or you have a job, or you live in a suburb community where there's a lot of people who live close together. Bring people together, do a food drive, because that difference, that small little time and effort it takes, makes the biggest difference, especially in somebody who's still actively out there. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. My name is Gerald Harris, and I'm here to share with you my story of homelessness here in Seattle. What happened was in 2016, in September, I moved to the Seattle area for a job offer. I received a letter of offer, came up the week before the job was supposed to start to familiarize myself with Seattle and get the lay of the land and also to enjoy myself a little bit downtown in this great city. Well, needless to say, the job was false. It was a fake. It was a hoax. So it left me in a position without a job. With that being on my head and in my heart and never having to face a homeless situation before, it left me scrambled. So there were about 5 days where I spent downtown Seattle with my umbrella propped up in a doorway of businesses with my luggage, of course. Because I really couldn't afford the hotel any longer, so I figured I better hold on to the little money I did have for something else better to come along. Well, it was 5 days of that, and thank God a Bremerton angel came through the city and saw me in the doorway and asked if I needed help. That individual brought me back to Bremerton. He was in the process of renovating a duplex that he owned both sides of, and allowed me to stay in the other side for helping clean and get it ready for the new tenant. I was so hoping and praying it would be me by locating a job. Unfortunately, the job search continued over here. He also pointed me to several resources, you know, the Salvation Army, the Rescue Mission, the Benedict House, DSHS, and a few other services that I definitely took advantage of, KMH and the Peninsula Community Health as well. So my job efforts continued throughout this process. Still nothing was happening. I had full hope after 35 years plus of customer service experience and being a manager of these facilities that I would have no problem in locating a job. Well, if you look around this room, you can see that I am definitely the minority in this part of the world, and it really wasn't as easy as I thought it was, as well-spoken and polished as individuals might think I am. Needless to say, I exhausted all of those efforts and resources, rather. Some of them were extinguished, I guess without my cause or my even understanding why those services were extinguished, but needless to say, there was nothing else for me to do. So then I found myself out at the encampment where I actually said, well, there's a band of homeless individuals. They've been living in the woods for months. I said, I'm homeless. I've always wanted to support homeless individuals. So now that I am one, this is my opportunity. So I moved to the encampment. The encampment, after 5 months, was disbanded. The city had came in and gave us notice that, unfortunately, we would have to leave those lands, which is located right near KMH, Kitsap Mental Health, up on Elahi, in case you're familiar with that part of town. There's an encampment, a piece of woods that basically individuals were living in. They came to us and said, unfortunately, the city has bought the property. We're going to ask that you vacate, but we'll provide you many services before just kicking you out of the woods. So they brought in KMH, they brought in West Sound Treatment Center, they brought in DSHS, Peninsula Community Health, you name it, all these individuals and volunteers to help us with this transition of now having to move. Joe Walter was also very key in providing storage fees to pay for our belongings to be stored so we didn't have to leave them. So that was a godsend for her to have been there to help us with that. Currently now, after being disbanded from the woods, I found myself down at the Salvation Army again during their wintertime rescue mission. That service actually ended April the 1st. So now there's no nighttime shelter available in the city. There is one, well, there might be two other entities, the Benedict House and maybe the Rescue Mission, but those entities weren't available to me at that time. Losing my track of thought here. So after exhausting the services and coming back to downtown, April the 1st, the Salvation Army ended their nighttime services. So April the 1st, believe it or not, I'm sitting in the alley going, what am I going to do now? There's no resources. Well, this friend that I've known for about a year and a few months, every time I would see this individual, he had his little boy with him. He would always stop and say hello, ask me if I had enough money for food, if I was doing okay. Well, I finally run into him again this very morning. I'm thinking this is a great April Fool's joke, right? he says to me, how are you doing, Joel? Are you doing okay? I said, yes, I'm doing very well. He said, are you needing a place to stay? And when he said that, my heart just went, dear Lord, thank you so much for this opportunity. Well, that situation is going to end in 30 days as well. So it's sort of like this cycle. I want people to understand that homelessness isn't something that all of us choose. There are a lot of us out there who are having a hard time with this situation and have done all that we could to fix that situation. Unfortunately, my struggle with the homelessness has sort of brought about it's brought about and aggravated some medical conditions that were already pre-existing. So now I'm in the process of applying for SSI for those medical conditions that can no longer be ignored on top of me being homeless. So it's quite a juggling act and a story that I hope to soon have fixed. So having this opportunity has brightened, I guess, my situation. It allows me to let others know what I'm going through, and maybe, like the speaker before had mentioned, for you to think of ideas and to come forward and to give help and assistance, because I've done all I could. I'm educated, I'm supposedly well-spoken and polished and reserved and pretty smooth, but this homeless situation has really changed me, and I hope a lot of that changes for the better. So I do want to thank you all for listening and for coming, and I want you to pray for me that this struggle is almost over. All right? Thank you.
One more big round of applause for all three of our panelists for lived experience. Okay, next I'd like to call up to the stage Kurt Wiest. Kurt is the Executive Director of the Bremerton Housing Authority, and Bridget Callahan, who is the manager of Kitsap Community Resources Housing Solutions Center. Bridget, where's Bridget? Okay, there she comes. Okay, so for this panel, again, we're going to tackle the scope of the problem. And I don't know if there are two people in Kitsap County who can do that better than these two. So what we're going to do is, again, give them 10 minutes to give us the lay of the land, and then we're also going to open it up and have some Q&A involved. So what that means is there are a few people wearing the buttons for WSSJ that you'll see out in the crowd, and you're going to be able to write some questions to them. May even have time possibly to bring the microphone around and have you ask the question, but be thinking about what questions that you want to ask, and they will come around and pick up those questions. Oh, and raise their hands. Okay. And so first, we are going to have Kurt go first. I'm going to bring this microphone over to you, and I'm going to take those two mics. So also, Kurt, Kurt has a PowerPoint presentation. You both have a PowerPoint presentation, so they're going to use this, and I will move away and yield the floor to you.
Thank you, Josh. Good afternoon, everyone. I am so honored to be able to come and share with you information that I have regarding the homelessness situation in Kitsap County. I'm grateful for MARTA and the Bremerton Methodist Church community that allows us to be here. I think that it is fitting that we meet in this building. This is a place of hope, as Richard has described. It's a place where healing happens, and it's a place where inspiration and actually miracles occur. I am a person of faith. If we could bring up my PowerPoint presentation. My background, I've worked with the Bremerton Housing Authority for 11 years, almost 12 years in this community. I have been involved in affordable housing as a career for over 30 years. And I love that I am able to take the passion of things that are important in my life and also be of service in the community. So let's take it to the next slide, if you would. This goes a little bit to where my heart is. and I want to quote at least a couple of scriptures. This is from Deuteronomy. For the poor shall never cease out of the land. Therefore I command thee, saying, Thou shalt open thine hand wide unto thy brother, to thy poor and to thy needy in thy land. It is scriptures like this that inspire me. It is why I dedicate myself to the cause of ending homelessness and ensuring that every person has a safe, decent, and affordable place to live. Another scripture that inspires me is what Jesus Christ gave us as a new commandment. A new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another as I have loved you. By this shall all men know, if ye are my disciples, ye will love one another. What drives you here today, I believe, is that concern for your brother, for your sister, for your neighbor, for those in our community that are without. I'm going to be sharing with you some rather disturbing statistics. And I don't want to be just the bearer of bad news and the teller of the obvious, but I hope that I can set a foundation for some hopeful discussion about where we go from here. I thank the Kitsap Sun, next slide, for article that appeared in the paper yesterday. This disturbing statistic is the average apartment rent in Kitsap County has now reached over $1,300 a month. It's $1,373 a month for the average rental apartment. This continues a trend. If we want to go to the next slide, it's a 10% increase over the previous year, and there are 5.2% apartments vacant in Kitsap County. What that really means, from those of you that manage or understand how markets work, that means virtually every apartment is occupied. When somebody moves out, somebody's going to move right in. And because of this imbalance between supply and demand, we see this escalation of rents. We'll go to the next slide. Between 2013, when we really started to come out of economically the Great Recession, to today, we've experienced nearly a 50% increase in the average rent in Kitsap County. And I'm speaking of these numbers to help you understand one of the reasons why we have a growing homeless population in Kitsap County. I also want you to understand that this is not something that is unique to Kitsap County. This is something that is happening regionally. It's happening throughout the state of Washington. There isn't a community, I think, in the United States that isn't affected in some way by a growing homelessness population. Go to the next slide. It's just showing that trend from 2013 to 2018 and the increase in rents in this area. The next slide, if we can go there, shows some statistics on apartment vacancies. There was a little bit of a blip in the fourth quarter of 2017. And that was because there was a brand new apartment complex that was open for occupancy on just off of Wheaton Way behind the Arby's. Thank you, behind the Arby's. But with the next quarter, we went down again. So we're not seeing an increase in the supply of housing in general, not even speaking about what affordable housing is. So we go to the next slide. I want to make sure that we're all understanding the same terms. In my world, when we talk about affordable housing, it is this. It's a definition that's given by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development that one's housing cost, that is rent or mortgage and utilities, should not exceed 30% of the household's gross income. You can do the math right now for yourself. Whether you have a mortgage, whether you pay rent, you know what your income is, you know what your shelter costs are. You can determine whether you are living in affordable housing or not right now. When we talk about affordable housing, it comes down to this. It's all about income. There are many factors relating to one's income. There are many factors relating to whether one can maintain stable housing, but the lower one's household income, the fewer choices are available to maintain stable and affordable shelter. Next slide. I want to talk about, let's see. I've prepared a chart over here. This chart represents the number of states in the United States where someone working a minimum wage can afford an average two-bedroom apartment. Can you all see my chart over here? There's nothing on this chart because there is no place in the United States where you can work a minimum wage job and afford the average two-bedroom apartment. It doesn't exist. So it's in Kitsap County, it's in the state of Washington, it's all over the United States. The mismatch between rent and income in Kitsap County is this. The hourly wage needed, if you want to go to the next slide, to afford a two-bedroom apartment in Kitsap County, working a 40-hour work week, 52 weeks out of the year, you need to make $23.84 an hour. And that's if you are working a 40-hour work week, and you are working 52 weeks out of the year, and you are making $23.84. So there is a big gap as it relates to affordability. Using again that term affordable, which is 30% of one's gross adjusted monthly income towards shelter costs. For every 100 extremely low-income households in Kitsap County, there are 12 affordable rental units. Extremely low income is defined by the Census Bureau and U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development is an income that is 30% of the area median income or below. So for every 100 households that meet that, that are in that criteria or below, there are only 12 rental apartments available. Here's another sobering statistic. Nearly 20,000 low-income households, that's households at 80% of the area median or below. There are a total of 4,272 affordable or rent-subsidized apartments in this county, making a gap of over 15,000 households that could benefit from affordable housing if it were available to them at a price that they could afford. So what happens when rent becomes affordable or unaffordable? If you want to go to the next slide. And the next one after that, and after that. Getting ahead of myself. So what happens when affordability is not achievable? It results in economic distress. Then you start having to make tough choices. Do I buy food? Do I pay rent? Do I fix the car? How am I going to pay for the child care? What about health insurance? Then it leads up to even greater choices, tough choices. Do I move? Somebody else going to be able to help me with my rent, my church, my family, leading to just simple avoidance. I just wish this problem would go away, and then to eviction. I'm going to wrap up with just some, again, very sobering statistics on evictions. If we want to go to the next slide. In 2014, there were 187 evictions in the district court in this county. 2015, 297, 2016, 357. I don't have more recent data, but I can assure you that it has not gone down. It has continued to go up. Just in that 3-year span, over 90% increase in the number of evictions. And it's a very clear indicator of great distress and affordability in our community. I want to, I guess, end a little bit on just an upper note. If I could take 30 seconds here. It's not all doom and gloom. The fact that we have people here today that are concerned about this, so concerned that they would take time to come and are doing little and small things that they can to help others, to show genuine love and concern. We have seen some increases in the number of affordable housing units available. In fact, Bremerton Housing Authority is proud to declare that over the last decade, we've increased the number of affordable housing units in this community by 60%. Part of that relates to the redevelopment project at the Old West Park Public Housing Project. So there is hope. but there is reason for great alarm as well. I'm not here to provide all of the solutions. My role in this presentation today was to give you some sense of the scope of the problem. I think I've sadly been successful in doing that. I'm going to end my presentation now and turn time over to Bridget.
And if anybody has a question, I'm going to be coming around, so please put your hand up. I'll be working my way around the audience, and I'll give it over to Bridget.
Hi, I'm Bridget Callahan. I'm the manager at Housing Solutions Center at Kitsap Community Resources. And if we can go to the next slide, I just want to start today and see if I can get some audience or participation and tell me what you see from this picture here. Does anyone see anything out of this picture here? I think, do I have a hand in the audience? Does anyone see anything in this picture? How about you up front? Exactly. I see someone right there that didn't get a shelter bed for the night. They're taking everything they own with them because they don't even have a shelter bed to sleep in. We do not have enough shelter beds here for a lot of the individuals seeking shelter. She has to have everything she owns with her. She's sitting there just trying to eat a meal with everything she possesses. So through Housing Solutions Center, we saw over 5,000 individuals for last year. 915 of those individuals were literally homeless. If you flip to the next slide, these are some of the statistics that come through our office. Back in November, we saw a woman, a single parent, come into our office. She was not only a veteran, she was a victim of domestic violence, and she was permanently disabled. She came into Housing Solutions in need of housing. Unfortunately, we don't have an answer today. I don't have a house to give somebody as much as I'd like to. But we were able to connect her with the YWCA. She was able to have some temporary shelter while we worked with her to find her permanent housing. She attended our Veterans Housing Option Group meeting, and she did get permanently housed with one of our vet services. Her and her son live in housing today. They were receiving 12 months worth of case management. They're continuing to get counseling with the YWCA. She is one of our success stories. And when you think of the homeless, you don't really think of the ages of homeless. Can you go to the next slide? Almost 2,000 of those 5,000 that we saw were under the age of 18. 394 were over the age of 60. About a year and a half ago, Bremerton Housing Authority allowed us to maintain their wait list for the senior housing. We had a gentleman that came through that we put on the wait list. While he waited those 8 months to get housing, affordable senior housing, he went back and forth between the Kitsap Rescue Mission and Salvation Army for temporary shelter. 8 months. A lot of us probably think 8 months is a long time, but for those of us that maintain wait lists, knows 8 months is a very short time to wait for affordable housing. He is now permanently housed through a senior housing unit through Bremerton Housing Authority. And then I want to talk about some of the barriers. So there's a lot of barriers to housing when people come through. They have no income or they have a lack of income. The average household that came through our agency last year, their income was $780 for the year. Not much housing you can find with $780 for the month. They have criminal backgrounds, and a criminal background might be just a criminal trespassing because they didn't get a shelter bed for the night and they had to camp somewhere. They might have a pet, and that pet can't go into shelter with them. There's a lot of different barriers to housing that they can't get shelter, let alone something permanent. And these are things that we need to work on so we can find people permanent housing. So the Housing Solutions Center is coordinated entry for Kitsap County. We're supposed to be the one-stop shop. When you're poor, when you don't have a lot of money, you don't have the resources to go from agency to agency. So it's our job to know what you qualify for. So we're not sending you to a bunch of different places. We can tell you where to go and where you can get services. We have access points in Port Orchard, in Bremerton, in Paulsbo, in Bainbridge Island, and for teens at Coffee Oasis. We also do outreach. We go to jails. We go to encampments. We go to drug courts. We go to rehab centers. We go to reach clients so that we can try to find them housing before they before they are actually out there on the streets. KCR has a lot of different programs. Our housing department is the case management piece for the different housing programs we have. We have an employment and training where you get case management to actively help you look for work. We have energy assistance, so once you are housed and you might have a bill that you can't pay, we can help keep you warm. We have Veterans Assistance Fund, so veterans can tap into maybe getting their rent paid, maybe getting help with their union dues, maybe even get groceries. We have weatherization, so that once you are housed, you can keep yourself warm. We have Head Start for low-income and homeless people for childcare. We have a kinship program for people taking care of children related to them that their parents are absent. We have several other classes that people can tap into to learn about. And then I want to go into the gaps. Some of the gaps that we don't have in Kitsap County are housing first. I talked to you about a few of our success stories, but I didn't talk about some of our failures. Some people that we've gotten house have some barriers. They might still be suffering from mental health issues. They might still be suffering from substance abuse, and they need those wraparound services that Housing First could offer. We don't have enough permanent supportive housing. We don't have enough affordable housing. We don't have enough shelter beds just in transition to get people permanently housed. Some of the low-income people might just be looking for a rent-a-room or a home share. Those are things our county is lacking and that we need to grow. How can all of you help? So you can help by volunteering. There's a lot of different social services that run on volunteers, and we could use volunteers maybe to keep shelters open at night, or maybe to keep it open during the day when it's snowing out so that families can stay in instead of have to going out during the day. You can advocate. You might know somebody that needs a little bit of help finding a job or needing help with housing, and you could be the middleman and advocate for them to help them cross over some of those barriers. You can educate landlords on what our programs are and how people deserve to be housed. And you can vote when you see laws come across that you think would change. And I want to leave you with a final thought. Proverbs 19:17. Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward them for what they have done. Thank you.
Okay, now we have 15 minutes for question and answer here with our two panelists. I want to open it with actually something that I went to in early February. I went to the first meeting ever of the Cascadia mayors, and this would be the mayor of Seattle, Portland, and Vancouver, British Columbia. It was there that Mayor Gregor Robertson, who's the mayor in Vancouver, British Columbia, had one piece of fellow advice for his fellow mayors. He said, use every single tool available to build affordable housing with, quote, laser focus. Those tools include incentives to encourage developers to build rental and affordable housing, using public land, rezoning, convincing builders to take a longer view on profits instead of the quick payoff of building luxury units. I'm curious, just to open things up, what tools are available in our community in terms of the whole toolbox? And either one of you.
I'll take a stab at it first. Is this on? All right. Again, I ended my presentation on what I call the West Park dividend. When we redeveloped the old West Park Public Housing Project, we had a grand vision, and that grand vision was the culmination of community meetings where residents of that development, as well as the surrounding neighborhood, the greater community, civic leaders, politicians, all got together and came up with a grand vision. What we were going to do to make change where there was 581 homes that had been built in 1941 and had long passed their useful life. And this grand master plan was conceived, adopted, and there was absolute unity in what we were going to do with that development. And with that absolute unity and consensus, we were able to tap into a huge range of resources to bring that vision of change there. That vision of change that has now resulted in an increase of over 60% in the supply of affordable housing units in this community. So what we were able to do was tap into 9% tax credits that are allocated by the Treasury and given to the state of Washington. The Washington State Housing Finance Commission gave a priority to the city of Bremerton. We received 2 9% tax credit allocations for that project. We went to the state legislature and asked for funds, and we were able to receive funds from the Housing Trust Fund, which is currently has over $100 million in it for housing throughout the state. We were able to convince HUD that when we sold land to people like the Carl's Jr. that's getting built there, that the proceeds from those land sales would go right back into building or acquiring deeply affordable housing in this community. And we've done that. We've acquired 6 different properties scattered throughout Bremerton: Shadow Creek, Casa del Sol, Winfield, and a couple of others. And these have added to the number of units that we have available that are deeply affordable. So there are tools. We've been really blessed. I'll be very honest with you, that's not something that every community in the state of Washington has been able to successfully transform their affordable housing into something that's new and an increase. But there are other things, and those that are politicians, those that are members of the city council, they know that there are things that they can look at seriously, and I see Council Member Huddy here, that they're considering, well, how can we make it so that we can increase the supply? We can make it so that we have accessory dwelling units allowed, or we increase densities so that we can increase the overall supply.
Sure. Well, I was going to say, with Housing Solutions, we do have a small pot of funds that we do use sometimes for landlord incentives. So if we have someone that we think the landlord may rent to or is debating if they want to rent to, we have a small pot of funds that we can tap into to do some form of landlord incentive so that they will take on one of our clients that has multiple barriers.
Okay. One person in the audience asked about the concept of rent control. Is that possible in this day and age? And we'll start with Kurt.
It certainly exists in other communities. That's something that's up to those that are in elected office, as well as I would assume that it would probably be something that would be brought by referendum to the voters, and that would be a very hard sell because you're going against market forces. I think there are things that we can do before we go to that, what I believe is a draconian step. We need to make it easier to develop. We need to increase the overall supply and let the market dictate. That's my personal feeling. I don't think that we would be successful in getting rent control here. That's my feeling.
I don't think I've asked that.
Okay, all right. So someone asked, what can local government officials do, then, kind of going into the same avenue, to actively address maybe the homelessness itself in terms of codes and regulations? Is there anything our local governments, any tools that they could use that are different?
Well, I don't think camping should be something that someone gets trespassed for. I really think that a lot of not having enough shelter beds, you have nowhere to go. And most people aren't, sleeping on the sidewalk. For going out to go camping would be something simple to use and not have to be trespassed for that and give you a criminal background. I'm sure there's lots of others, and I think that clapping made me lose my train of thought.
Okay, well, perhaps that's a segue into something else. Kurt and I have actually had discussions about this. Both we've heard about Utah. Utah gets a lot of press for its Housing First model. Also, we have a unique program here called Kitsap Connect that I think is worth touching on at this point that sort of has Housing First in action. And I wonder if one of you might be able to talk a little bit about that program and within the context of what Utah has done.
Well, I can talk a little bit about Kitsap Connect itself. So we are the housing piece for Kitsap Connect. They're the high utilizers of emergency services. They do have a kind of housing first. We house people through Kitsap Connect before they've addressed certain issues. The education to the landlords is what we need. A lot of landlords private landlords don't want housing first. So that's kind of been a barrier for us for Kitsap Connect. It's finding the landlords that will accept individuals that are still battling with some of those things. If we could find a landlord with a lot of different units that we can bring in services to, that would be a truer housing first, and it would be easier to case manage those individuals. I mean, that's something I feel we need here, because it's hard to do a scattered site housing first with private landlords.
Okay, Kurt?
In preparing for the presentation today, I prepped myself mentally to answer every question with, well, the simple answer is it's complicated. And I stand by that. We can't come up with one solution to solve homelessness, because the problem of homelessness is as varied as the number of people that find themselves struggling with having safe, decent, affordable shelter. But what has been proven to be successful for one population, and that's the chronic homeless, those that are not only without shelter but are also burdened with mental illness, drug and alcohol, and other substance abuses. In the state of Utah and in other communities, they have successfully developed housing that provides shelter first, or housing first. A safe, a decent, a permanent place for somebody to live that is combined with on-site services that would address mental health, substance abuse disorders, and put somebody reverse the spiral that they're in, put a stop to that spiral downward, and reverse it going upward to a thriving, abundant kind of life that you and I think every human being wants to have. What does it take? Well, in the state of Utah, it took political will. The governor said this is not acceptable to have the large, visible, chronic homeless in Salt Lake City and other communities along the Wasatch Front. And he asked the second most important person in the state of Utah, the lieutenant governor, to convene a task force. And they brought in a wide range of groups and then adequately funded it. They gave a priority for tax credits. They funded money from the legislature. And this task force decided how they were going to allocate those funds. They built nearly 2,000 units, and they went to the highest utilizers of emergency rooms and jails, and they were able to reverse that trend of that downward cycle. The point that they had reduced homelessness by 80%, chronic homelessness, and the retention rate of those that were put in stable housing first environments, 1 year later, 90% were still adequately housed. So it works. We've had deep discussions in this community about how we can take that same housing first, or that permanent supportive housing concept, and make it happen here. Bremerton Housing Authority, Kitsap Community Resources, Kitsap Mental Health Services, Community Frameworks. We've been having deep discussions about what do we do to make that happen. We've worked with our local mayor and have had some very preliminary discussions with others to look at making this happen. And there is the will, there's the desire, and there certainly is the need for a housing first concept here.
Okay, An audience member asks about something actually that we've covered in the Kitsap Sun recently, which is that there are around 130 properties that are considered abandoned. That is, no one is living there, no one's allowed to live there, and they have either the homeowner has passed away or circumstances you just can't go on site, and for whatever reason, the owner of the note or the debt on the property is not moving quickly, and that's probably putting it mildly, to get it back out onto the market. So is there something that can be done in your eyes about, the audience member asks, eminent domain, putting pressure on property owners? Is there any hammers or is there any tools that local governments could utilize?
Well, the simple answer, it's complicated. But I know that, and Member Huddy is here, they've had these serious discussions about this, and I have every confidence that our mayor and council can make that, can make some progress in that regard. But I can't speak for Council Member Huddy or the mayor, but he can speak for himself.
Okay. Thank you, Councilman Huddy. Okay. Okay. We have time for one more question with our panelists here, and want to get to this because this question was asked multiple times, more than any other, but it has to do with a controversial subject in the community, and it brings up the T word, taxes. Housing levy. Would that help? How could it help? And is there any kind of appetite, in your estimation, of our local governments to even consider such an idea?
Bridget says it's all on me. I'll be candid with you. There is a cost when there's, to everyone, when there is a tax levied. It has successfully been levied in other communities. Seattle, City of Seattle is one. Bellingham, Whatcom County, City of Vancouver, they have all passed recently levies to tax their citizens to increase the supply of affordable housing. So we could do that, and we could take the statistics that you've seen here, and we could take the very personal stories that you may have, or members of your family, or people that you know, and show the need for us to tax ourselves to raise funds to increase the supply of affordable housing. I want to throw out one thing, though, that I think we should all be aware of. It's a matter of prioritization. I live in subsidized housing. I'm a homeowner. But I live in subsidized housing because I declare on my taxes every year a deduction for my mortgage, interest paid on my mortgage. I've done that for over 30 years. In the state of Washington, the amount of money that is generated or deducted for mortgage interest is $8.6 billion. That's in the state of Washington. Nationwide, it's $277 billion of a tax deduction for homeowners. And I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's a reality. And then when those that we elect to Congress, the appropriators, are wrestling with how much money we should put in defense, how much we should put into education, how much we should put towards national parks, these are all priorities that we need to make. It comes down to locally, is that a priority for us? Certainly we should have that debate. We had some discussions about 9 months ago on the subject and found that it was not well received, at least among some of the constituencies that we talk to. But it comes out of meetings like this, where we get either the support or the sobering thought that that's not a wise decision or not a wise path to go down. So I'd leave it up to you and your friends and neighbors whether that's something that we should consider here.
Okay, let's give these two a round of applause for this panel. Thank you, Bridget and Kurt. Okay, thanks. All right, and we'll welcome to the stage our next panel, the next three speakers. First up is Renee Kimball. Where are you, Renee? Renee is someone who has experienced homelessness herself and is also an advocate. We have Gina Chamberlain coming to the stage. Welcome, Gina. She is a housing advocate, and she's worked in affordable housing for more than the last 2 decades. And finally, we have Mike O'Shaughnessy, who is the executive director of the Kitsap Rescue Mission, 25 beds in downtown Bremerton that helps people get on the path to permanent housing. Let's welcome these three. Thanks for coming up here. So we have a live mic right there. Go ahead and use that one. And we're going to start with Mike. And again, we have 3 speakers here and 20 minutes or so for them to tell us a little bit about their backgrounds. And we are moving, of course, into possible solutions. So we're thinking about, even though we had quite a bit of conversation in the last panel about this as well, into what solutions to our homelessness epidemic look like. So with that, Mike, let's see if that microphone works for you. If not, I'll give you this one.
Helps with a button first, right? So there we go. I got to be smarter in what I'm working with. All right, well, like Josh said, I'm the executive director at the Kitsap Rescue Mission. And man, I just want to thank everybody for being out here today. It's amazing to see, sometimes working in the ministry that we work in, we feel very isolated and very not in my backyard. Comes up a lot because of homelessness issues. And I want to say that talking about possible solutions, I don't come here and sit and say, because I work in this ministry field, that I have all the answers. But 12 years ago, I was homeless on these streets, addicted, a felon. All those pieces happened to me. And so I come from real life experience. I had a 7-month pregnant wife, and we lived in Illahee for quite some time, and then lived in my truck, and so on and so forth. So this comes from practical stuff that I've walked with. And, there's been conversations about shelter that's been mentioned in the last one. Not enough of shelter beds. Currently, after Salvation Army closed April 1st, we're the only low-barrier shelter year-round. Now, there's some terms there. Low barrier meaning that anybody can get in. Now, there's no processes too, like Benedict House, which is a great place, 90-day transitional housing. There's some stuff that you have to go through to get into that, but we are the only one in town right now with beds. Last year, we provided over 8,000 bed nights. 368 individuals, unique individuals, stayed at our shelter, from men, women, children, and families. Each one of them that comes in, they get a fresh shower every night. They get to change into a set of scrubs, and it's so they at least have some fresh clothes to put on, and then they sleep in clean sheets every night at the mission, because we believe that that everybody needs somewhere to stay. I don't care what your background is. I don't care what criminal history you have, what addictions you have. I believe that you'll be able to start moving forward if you can have a good night's rest and feel safe and secure right there. And what we're doing right now is in remodeling, so we're going to try to grow our mission to serve up to 45 beds of overnight shelter, emergency shelter, and then grow a 2-year program upstairs where it can serve up to 30 men and up to 15 to 20 women upstairs in a 2-year-long discipleship program that addresses some of these issues. Because what we're finding is 90 days is not enough to get over some of these barriers. I mean, I was a drug addict for 4 years on $200 day methamphetamines, and 90 days does not get you off of methamphetamines that fast. It's a long-term process, and then it doesn't let you deal with like your licensing and all those other pieces. So shelter beds are huge. The other part of that is we've only got one downtown. And I know of homeless encampments all the way from Kingston and Hansville, all the way to the south end in Olalla, that they're so spread out in our county that they can't get to my shelter at night. The Kitsap Transit does their best, but there's not enough bus routes to get them there to our shelter at night. And even if they do get to my shelter, they might not get in because they are not connected to Housing Solutions, because we partner with them. Our whole idea with our shelter is let's partner with Housing Solutions, have them stay in our shelter transitionally while Housing Solutions works on a long-term goal of housing. What's that look like? Because individually, it might be different. It might be somebody needs more mental health housing. Somebody might need physical, a place to stay to rehab. We don't even have a respite care in the county. So when somebody comes out of the hospital, I was talking with Joe today, one of the people that we know best, that Joe was helping with at the Elmira encampment, she got frostbite in Elmira. Had to go to surgery, had to have some appendage removed, and then went back out into the woods and got into an argument with her boyfriend in the mud, in the rain, and caused that surgery to be infected and reissued back into the hospital. But if we had respite care, they would go from surgery in the hospital right into a respite care facility, and then the hope with that is partnering with Housing Solutions and other places that we get them into temporary housing and then permanent supportive housing. But we don't even have that right now. And that's conversations that are happening all over the place. You know, one of the visions for the rescue mission is to see a tiny 20-bed shelter in North Kitsap, one in Central Kitsap, and one in South Kitsap. Just shelter, emergency shelter, just to say every night there's at least 80 beds of emergency shelter throughout the county that somebody can come in and can stay. Because we won't have what we had last week, where we had a man who didn't get into our shelter, was found dead the next morning at 61. Because he had medical problems, because he had all those needs, and our beds were full. And my staff feels so horrible when we have to say, we're full. And the reality comes, sometimes it is money. We just don't have the extra staffing, the extra things to care for everyone. But if we started spreading it out and started doing more little shelters, more little places, there would be more available opportunity. Then the other part comes when I'm talking about, I'm also part of the conversations of tiny homes communities. Those are huge. We currently have, I think it's 12 of them in Port Orchard right now, unused, sitting on church parking lots, advertising it, but no one is housed in them. I applaud Suquamish. They built 6 and just put it up, and they just started doing it. It's amazing. They've learned some lessons in it, but at the same time, they've put 6 up and they're housing people right now actively, and they're doing case management and they're moving people forward, and that's amazing. But every time we come to this tiny homes community conversation, it is, well, it's good for that neighborhood or it's good for this neighborhood, but not in my neighborhood. And I find it ironic that we fear the homeless so much, when yet some of the stuff that I read in newspapers, some of the most atrocious things come out of people who are housed. Being homeless has nothing to do with being a villain or anything else. But what we've done is we don't see them as people anymore. And I think for part of some of the solution is starting to look at people who are experiencing homelessness as that could be me. Statistically, we're part of AGRM, which is Association of Gospel Rescue Missions, and so 300 missions throughout the United States. And they do a lot of research. Statistically, it says 85% of us in the United States are one paycheck away, one tragedy away, one medical experience away from being homeless ourselves. One mistake. That's a lot of pressure on people. And yet, those who are experiencing homelessness, they just continue to fall back and back and back because tragedy and mistakes and things happen that put them further and further back. They become indebted. They become owing county fines. They start to owe jail time fines. They start to owe all these things. And the mountain that they have to climb out of is huge. 2 minutes. So solutions my personal feeling, and this is what I share at the rescue mission, is this is a community effort. I'm a man of faith. I was rescued by Jesus Christ. But not everybody is, but that's all right, because here in Kitsap, I love this place, we can say enough's enough. We can say we're tired of people sleeping in the doorways, we're tired of people sleeping in tents, we're tired of that. We want to see our brothers and sisters of our community housed and healthy, mentally taken care of, physically taken care of. We want to do that. And that's part of the solution, is we need to change the perception of what homeless people are and who they are, because it could be any one of us. And so I just want to thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike. Okay, here you go, Gina.
Hi, I'm Gina Chamberlain, and I'm glad to be here with all of the local experts and then with a room full of people who are coming out on a Sunday afternoon because they know there's a problem and we want to figure out how to solve it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about advocacy and what we can do with our power and our voices. I've been working in affordable housing for over 25 years, but I'm new to Kitsap County. And on the public policy and the advocacy end, there's always really three main things. So next slide. And those three things are funding. There's not enough money. Policy. Sometimes you have policies that are preventing communities from meeting what their local need is. And then there's program priorities. And all three of those are things that happen on the national, the state, and the local level. And all three are ones that we as individual citizens can play a part in. On the funding level, on the federal level, over the last 8 years, there has been an average of a 6.5% cut in housing programs. On the state level, we have the Housing Trust Fund. Last year, they received twice as many ready-to-go applications than they had funding for. And it was funded at a little over $100 million, and at its highest level, it was about $200 million. On the local level, we do get some funds locally from document recording fees, from the 0.1% sales tax, and some pass-through. But again, there is usually twice as many requests as there is funding available. Now, on advocacy, I want to talk about some successes. On the state level in Washington, we did have several wins this past year, which is why it's important for us to get involved, because we can win at times. We got rid of the ability of landlords to discriminate based upon the renter having rental subsidy. We got the recording fees increased and permanent that support affordable housing. So those are all great things. Now let's talk a little bit about the local level. We've heard already the idea of a housing levy. And that, again, I think Kurt already hit a lot of my points, which is great because he does a much better job of it. But in local communities across the nation, developing local affordable housing trust funds has been the solution, not the whole solution, but a piece of the solution. You just need more resources. So what that would look like is 36 cents for every $1,000 of assessed value, which would generate $11.25 million a year for Kitsap County. Now that sounds like a whole lot of money, but one affordable housing development, for example, if we were to have like a 70-unit housing first model, that could be up to between $15 and $20 million. So it's not going to solve our problem, it's just going to get us further down the road. There's been, Kurt already covered this, communities that have already passed that. We've got 3, and then we've got 6 others that are considering it. And as Kurt said, there's been a lot, I'm sorry, I keep telling you not to do the next slide. I'm doing it here, and I'm not telling, sorry. So next slide. Sorry. There's been a lot of work done on the local level, and it is our role to say whether this is something that we want to happen in our community and to help move that forward. So we'll talk a little bit more about how to get involved. Next slide. That's the funding piece. Now we need to talk about the policy and the program priorities piece. We've heard a lot about the Housing First model. We as advocates need to be saying this is what our community needs. Next slide. So here's a sample. You know, Housing First is putting humans first. It's putting people first. It's what is successful. But if we want to talk about dollars, it's also the most effective way to help folks who are experiencing homelessness. So on this, you can see that in Philadelphia, it was $76 a night versus the alternatives that often folks end up falling into of transitional housing or jail or emergency room or psychiatric hospital. Those are much bigger price tags, and they aren't meeting the need of the individual. So let's talk a little bit more about dollars and cents. Kurt talked about we're all doing our taxes, something I need to finish up tonight. We're all doing our taxes, and for those of us who own a home, we have that mortgage deduction and that tax deduction, or the property tax deduction. On the national level, higher income households get 4 times the housing benefit than low income folks. So households that made over $200,000 got on average a $6,000 benefit. That's not the deduction, that's actually the reduction in taxes, $6,000, versus households that made $20,000 or less received only about $1,500. So 4 times more goes to the higher income folks. So next slide. I played with my little tax form and ran a quick scenario for Kitsap County. So if a higher income person who might have a $500,000 house, 30-year mortgage, 4% interest, they would get a $4,000 reduction in taxes. A very low income, 30% of very median income, extremely low income person in Kitsap County have an annual income of $17,400. If we were to provide rental subsidy in an efficiency apartment, that rental subsidy would only be $3,480 a year. So, our budgets are moral documents. We as citizens, next slide, need to take action. So what action can we take? How to stay informed? Join the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance. Wonderful organization. They will, 1, welcome your donations. 2, they'll help you stay informed, and they'll also help you be connected with your elected officials. Advocate for a housing levy if that's what you think is needed. Advocate for the Housing First model. Next slide. And so we're going to have more conversations going forward this afternoon, but what we ask you to do is if you are interested in being a part of the solutions of further conversation, because I'm trying to boil down all of housing policy in less than 7 minutes, take your name tag, and on your name tag, add your last name and your contact information, your email, your phone number, both, and stick it on these flip charts that you'll see at the doors. And then we'll know how to get a hold of you, and we will survey you to find out what your interest is, find out when a good meeting time is. But the goal is that we will have a meeting by June 1st to figure out what our strategy is going forward as a community. How can we be advocates for change? So, thank you.
And Renee.
Gunachis Hawa, that is hello and thank you in my native language, Haida. I come from the Eden Shaw clan of Haida Gwaii. I also come from the Kimballs of Manette. All my life, I was raised by a mother who understood her obligation to Creator. She told me that Creator, he doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called, and I have been called, and this life isn't about me, but it's about performing my calling. I'm a storyteller, a warrior, an advocate, a movement builder, and a strength builder. Coming from the Raven clan, I learned that a bird doesn't sing its song because it can. It sings because it has a story. And all of our stories are our strength. The land we're on right now has a culture and a set of values that Chief Sell summed up the best. Man does not weave this web of life. He is merely a strand. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. And that formula, we really need to get back to. Having grown up here, this was Mayberry RFD, and it just seems like once the concrete started coming in, we've kind of separated. So I like to say I'm going to take you on a journey and it's going to lead in a dance that we natives call the round dance. It's a dance of unity. As the circle gets larger, it closes in on itself, and the outer and the inner circle shake hands. We need to also recognize if you live, eat, work, breathe here, you're a leader. Everyone is a leader. In order to recognize the similarities and celebrate our differences, we have to address and eliminate stereotypes and prejudice. We need to adopt people-first language. And as one of the unhoused community members, I too need to not address myself as homeless, but as an unhoused person or a person without a home, but I am not my condition. So I'm First Nations, so now I'm saying we are all going to be First People. And when you're out in the community, stop and correct language. Bring it back to people first. We've talked a little bit about criminalization. Criminalization sentences people to life in debtor's prison. I'm in there myself right now. It also sends a message that while we were housed, we were community members. Now that we're not housed, it seems like the community is trying to eradicate us like rodents. I mean, just who has the right to public space? So criminalization divides us. It does not foster community. In Homelessness 101, you protect your resources. You like to stay where you're comfortable, the community where you became unhoused. But can I have the meal site slide come up, if anyone has that? If they don't. In protecting your resources, you need to stay close to the meal sites. And a lot of our folks have been loitered ticket or received some kind of fine. So they try to stay far away from Bremerton, try to dip in for breakfast, hide until lunch because they don't want to be further criminalized. The American Bar Association Commission on Homelessness and Poverty, they can help communities set up a homeless court program. And these are non-threatening ways to resolve warrants and criminal charges. They're sometimes at a library. They're never in a courthouse, or they're at a shelter. And I think we as a community might need to look at that. When it's easy for us that have been criminalized to feel like we're the cash cow for the city or town that we received our criminal fine in. But homes are not, they're a basic human right. They're not something that you earn. And I'm here to tell you that more people become mentally ill and addicted while homeless. my PTSD has really, it's a struggle for me to have the concentration to put a report together or do college. But we have the damage of the one story. When you stereotype homelessness, that is just a snapshot in time. That's as if their story doesn't have a beginning and it doesn't have an ending. And for those of us that are homeless, the only way out of that is to realize that our story is our strength. That was the only way I could kind of start moving out and getting the faith to believe I would get a house. So I would like to wrap up with December 21st is the longest night for the homeless. On a church, on Veneta, around the fireside, we had a memorial for the people that lost their lives in 2017 without a home. So, Sonia Ruffin, Michael Yoho, Jeffrey Jolabosis, and Ron DeBose. Ron actually was a veteran. He died the day before Veterans Day. And in 2018, a young man, also a friend of mine, Anthony Griffin, died without a home. So there are some simple solutions. There are some things that don't cost money, but there's no dumb ideas either. Kids are even involved. I read of a STEM academy where kids made a cell phone charger that you could get 15 minutes to charge your cell phone by depositing a plastic recyclable bottle in there. So we can't leave kids out. And in this election season, please vet your candidates. Hold them accountable. What are you going to do? And don't forget your local elected officials. They're here, they stay here. A lot of times their fixes are a little bit easier. And there are rent bidding sites we need to get banned here. One of them, Rentberry, I think, but it allows a property to come on the market, and those with plenty of money can say, that apartment's $1,000, I will pay $3,000 a month. So these properties aren't even coming on the market, but Seattle banned rent bidding companies from operating in Seattle. We need to do the same.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Renee. So this is a question for more of a comment for the panel and for the crowd. United Way of Kitsap County informs us that Kitsap County has been awarded $121,000 in emergency food and shelter program monies from the federal government. And I bring this up because United Way would appreciate it if there are organizations here that are desiring to apply for that money. I have contact information for you, but it also goes into a question that some of you have asked and is definitely worth asking, which is, we've talked about government solutions, but what about since we have affordable housing, we have shelter, and those kind of perspectives on our panel right here. If you were to do one single thing right now in terms of taking all of us, all of the momentum in the community towards working to change and and alleviate this problem, what would it be? You take all the churches and nonprofits, et cetera, and all the advocates and volunteers. What singular thing might you focus on that is perhaps the greatest issue? And maybe we can start with Gina, if you'd be willing.
Well, I think I have to say that everybody's individual acts of generosity and kindness is always important, but everybody demanding that there are more resources for affordable housing would be the one.
I would try to take this community from NIMBY, not in my backyard, to tiny houses in my backyard. Holding a book group around the book Evicted from Professor Matthew Desmond, or our local author Jonathan Evison, his new book Lawn Boy talks about the working poor. I think education, conversation, paramount. So that we can stop being bottlenecked there and get people housed now.
And I think, so tiny homes and rent share and all, there's multiple things that are going to fit different people, but I personally believe that I would take this room and say we demand a local community shelter, period. That's 100 bed plus. Because 25 beds doesn't do it, and it can't all be just on social services doing it. We got to say as a city, it's time that we run a shelter with agencies that are dealing with that, so thank you.
Another question we received deals with our senior population. Obviously, they're not immune to homelessness as well. And in your capacities, I'm wondering what you see with regard to basically an older population. Do they have a priority of some kind, and is there an equal problem amongst folks who maybe are 60 plus to the rest of the demographics?
So if anybody's read Richard's book, Breakfast at Sally's, his house that he stayed in right across the street from me is a gentleman named John, who currently has his own place, but no heat, no power, barely any food. So he comes to the shelter all the time. So I would say the greatest generation that won World War II, the baby boomers are now all aging. And we're now starting to see more and more. I love Kurt's fact. I mean, Bridget sharing with us, over, the population of 61 and over is growing in the mission. Like, it is split between younger. There's very few at my age in the 30s and 40s, and then now it's from 55 to 60, 70, and 80. Some in 90 that we're seeing there. So I would say it's a growing problem, and I would say that one of the things is, along with respite care, we need elderly care homes that are specifically built around those who are experiencing homelessness, that are in that population of the elderly, because they're going to need specific things as you age. So it's just another solution to that demographic, I think.
I would like to say, since the fast ferry came in, I've been talked to by a number of elders. Most of them been widowed. They sold their house. They moved into a little rental. The house flippers are here. And greed is winning out over humanity. I mean, they thought they would spend their lives in this little rental house, and they're wondering where to go when the house flippers buys the house. There's nowhere. There's nowhere.
3 minutes. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Another question comes to us about single transitory accommodation permits allowed in Kitsap County. And this sort of unpacks the last question we asked about what singularly we can do together, but what about just individual organizations, churches, nonprofits? What can they do, and can they host this kind of housing? What's the process like?
Good question. The process. I feel like I see my outreach director. I think she wrote this question. So, this is a great question because it has not been done. The larger encampment application hasn't been done. Single transitory hasn't been done. We're in the middle of conversations with it. What it is we need property. We need a church. We need a person to say, I want to host a tiny home on my property, and the county wants to go through that process with you. I know that we at the Rescue Mission, Monica with KMH, and all of us, part of this tiny homes community conversation, want to see people step forward in doing this. So if you want to do this, you want to host it, please contact me. We would love to have a place to do it because that's really what we need. If you're a church, Washington State says you can host an encampment without the government actually making it harder. You have the right to do it. So, and I think churches don't understand some of those pieces. So we are in those conversations. I would love to talk to you more about it because I think it's the next step. It really is. So.
Okay, we've got 1 minute left here. So let's see. Where do we want to go from here? I think we should wrap up. I think we should move on to the next and keep things moving here. So round of applause for our panel, everybody. Okay. Okay, so everybody had an index card. Hopefully you still have that and you have something to write with. So today, when you came in the door, we had you write down one word basically describing what comes to your mind when you think of homelessness when you came in the door. We're curious about whether your opinions, whether your beliefs, perspectives may have changed by what you've heard. So we'd like you to repeat the exercise only after having contemplated and digested all of the things that you've heard. Perhaps you choose a different word. What we're going to do is compile all of those and during our next speaker, and we'll be able to show you the first word cloud, what you came in with, and then afterwards, I think this is going to be really cool, we'll be able to see what you thought after that. Make sense to everybody? So go ahead and write those words down as we're thinking about it. And while you do that, I'm going to call Monica Bernard to come up here. Now, Monica has worked for many nonprofits in our community as she was at the Kitsap Community Resources before. She is now the manager for Community Services and Development at Kitsap Mental Health Services. For the next half hour or so, she's going to have a presentation. I'm going to yield the floor here to her. And one of the things, I know you have your presentation prepared, Monica, but one of the things that I think people are curious about, and I know that I am, and I wasn't able to get to the questions with others, was kind of this idea of, we've heard that the financial case as well as the human case, right, being made for it's expensive to continue in what can be a vicious cycle, and that there may be a better way to do that. So are we on the throes of a big change, a great big change here that's just happening and it's going to take time, or are there still barriers? And so I'll leave it to you, and I'd like everybody to give a round of applause to Monica Bernard.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. About 20 years ago, I was in Seattle, and it was the day after Thanksgiving, and my mom and my sisters and I, we always used to go there every year, just to take in the holidays. And that particular year, around the corner by Macy's, it might have been the Bon Marché back then, there was this man. He was sitting in a wheelchair. And his hair was just very disheveled. His face had lines that told this story of his life. And he was sitting there, and he had this cardboard sign. We've seen them. It said, "Veteran, anything will help." And so without really thinking, the music in the background, the cheerfulness of the holidays, I reached into my pocket and I just put in a couple of dollars and some change, whatever I could find, and I kind of cast down my eyes because, you know, it's hard to look at homelessness. And I walked away, and then I heard his voice behind me, and he said, "God bless you." And I thought, God bless me? You're sitting in a wheelchair, and you don't have a place to go at the end of the night. And that was my naive view. And then it really, really haunted me by what I didn't do that day. Because I never asked him his story. I never looked into his eyes. I never asked him his name. You see, we can talk about numbers all day long, but each number is a person, is a story, is a journey that got people to homelessness. This is not a red or blue issue. Liberals don't own compassion. Conservatives don't own fiscal sound solutions. This is a matter of social justice. Social justice. Housing is about social justice. And that is why we're here today. So I want to share with you a little bit about what our community is doing with the homeless housing plan. And if I could get the next slide. I'm gonna scream through some of the early slides because, you know, the folks that preceded me did so much of the groundwork for you on the scope of the problem. But first of all, I also want to acknowledge that the homeless housing plan has the ownership of that is at Kitsap County. And Kirsten Jewell, who couldn't be here today, but really is the heart and the fierce supporter of homeless issues in our community. So a lot of the data and things are from her. If we can go. If you look at the numbers that Bridget talked about, that Kurt talked about, it comes out to 1 in 150 people in our community were homeless in 2017. 1 in 150 people were homeless in 2017. Next. On any given day, given the point in time count, more than 200 people are unsheltered, and we know those numbers are low. We know they're low because average point in time counts understate the problem by 2 to 3 times. There were 146 people, I believe, that were unsheltered in January, and then there were an additional 60 or 70 people that just lost their shelter at the Salvation Army when it closed at the end of March. Next. But the real tragedy is it's not just adults, as we've heard. 1,143 school-aged children homeless in Kitsap County across our school districts. Since 2008 to 2009 school year, it's increased from a little over 250 to 2016, 1,143 students. Next. We've talked about the root causes of homelessness, poverty, housing affordability, living wage jobs. I'm coming from Kitsap Mental Health Services, and we know that untreated mental illness and untreated substance use disorders are definitely contributing factors as well for many people. People are being discharged from Western State Hospital without a housing plan. People are being discharged from our local hospitals without a hospital plan. People are being discharged from jail without a hospital plan. Next. And so if we could go forward like 3 or 4 slides, because we've talked about some of these things. Next one. So I'm here to talk to you about the homeless housing plan. Next. Every community across this country has to have a homeless housing plan. It's required by us, by the Washington State Legislature. The first one was done in 2005. It's been updated several times since then. Essentially, it provides the framework for what gets done in this community and what gets funded. It's not something that sits on a shelf. It actually guides funding decisions. Next. So what is the process? Well, several community members, agency leaders got together to look at the plan, see what needs to get updated. A big portion of the plan is all this demographic and homeless data, because you have to really understand what the gaps are before you kind of start throwing solutions at it. Then, many of us met, if you could go backwards. Many of us met with mayors and commissioners. There's been stakeholder workshops, provider survey, homeless client survey, and we've also looked at what's working around our community. Next. So we know that the homeless housing plan makes an impact because there's been a nightly low barrier shelter. We've started prioritizing services for the most vulnerable. Housing Solutions is doing targeted outreach and so much more. Next. But there still are so many gaps. And I would say one of the biggest gaps, as Mike alluded to, is the lack of a year-round low-barrier shelter in our community that help people with mental health and substance use or physical disabilities. We lack respite care. We lack sufficient residential shelter for couples, people with pets. We lack housing for people exiting from jails and prison. And of course, we lack enough affordable housing. Next. So our new plan has some certain requirements by the state. The steps have to be actionable, so they can't just be these touchy-feely things. They actually have to be something that can be measured. There has to be a timeline for implementation, and there has to be an agency that says, I'll take that one on in order for it to be in our plan. So the Kitsap County Housing Plan, the goals and strategies. The plan is essentially focused on how do we make homelessness rare, how do we make it brief, and how do we make it one time? And how do we improve our overall community response system? And how do we engage the community? So all the steps that we're looking at are really focused on those things. Next. So goal number 1, making homelessness rare. We want to reduce the number of people who are new to homelessness through continued eviction prevention. You heard Kurt talk about the number of evictions, short-term rental assistance, partnerships with landlords. We also want to create more permanent supportive housing, coordinating discharge from systems, respite beds, looking at alternative housing models like boarding houses, ADUs, tiny cottages, and we want to incentivize the development of affordable housing. To make homelessness brief, this is to get people sheltered as quickly as possible after they become homeless. So part of that is to open a year-round, low-barrier shelter with on-site behavioral health services. If I could put 10 stars next to that one, I would. That is, to me, having done this work for a number of years, it is honestly one of the most critical things we need to have happen. We also need to, as a community, start leveraging some of the new funding sources like Medicaid, and we have to get the cities now looking at what the county's done with transitory accommodations, allowing there to be legal tent camps or tiny villages. We need the cities to engage as well. Next. And to make homelessness one time, we need to expand services or connections to services, because if you get somebody housed and then just walk away, for some people that works, because that's maybe all they needed. But for a lot of people, they need that extra support to keep them stabilized in that housing. So we're really focusing on including employment and marketable skill building into all of our housing programs, as well as, again, leveraging some Medicaid funding that's out there for supported employment. So that's helping people who might otherwise not be deemed employable to help them get employment. How do we continuously improve the response system? We want to implement shelter care standards. Our shelter system is awesome in this community. There's not enough, but we have some amazing providers. So we'd like to raise the bar in terms of the shelter care that's provided. We want to be able to develop a tool that we can predict not just next year, but 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road. What is our need for affordable housing in this community? And how do we get in front of that? And as our local elected officials, our county government, how do we get in front of that to start developing some plans? How can we expand provider training? And how do we measure our effectiveness? And finally, expanding community engagement. We need to advocate for, attract, create additional funding for housing. Because you've heard it, the units are getting taken up as fast as they become available. So how do we bring more units online? How do we coordinate our messaging around homelessness to change some of the attitudes in our community? How do we provide opportunities for volunteerism? And how can we promote Homeless and Hunger Awareness Week, which is a kind of a national week in November that really highlights some of the issues around homelessness? So those are some of the kind of the key elements of the local homeless housing plan. Next. And now it's your turn. We don't have a ton of time. We have about, I think, another 15 minutes or so. But I would like to get your perspective on a few things, and I'm going to ask Sally to help me take some notes since I'm holding the mic. And where did I put them? So I'm going to ask you a few questions, but feel free to go on a tangent. If you think that this is not your question and you have a different idea, go ahead. Next. So to share your perspective, I want to ask you, how do we build the political will in Kitsap County to build housing first units, to overcome the NIMBYism? How do we build political will to build that low barrier shelter before this coming winter? Okay, I want to start seeing some hands raised. Yeah.
I would say what has been said before, we have to hold our elected officials accountable, start attending town hall meetings, and start using your voice.
Great, thanks. Next, thank you very much. Yeah.
I'm with the YWCA Kitsap, and I say steal shamelessly. Find a program that's working and mimic it. Make it work for us.
Great, thank you. Who else did I see over here?
We saw slides about how Housing First is less expensive than sending people to jail or to the hospital. We need to educate the public about what are the long-term economic savings to Housing First.
So what I hear you saying is that it's not just telling the story of homelessness, it's actually telling the story that says this is a great economic investment for our community. Hi.
Based on your last comment, I think it would be really helpful if you could actually inform people about how much we're already spending on this and whether and what kind of investment it has been and how well it's being spent. And before we ask for another property tax, provide a specific idea of how that money will be spent, what it will be spent for, and what we can expect from it.
I think that's a really, really good point. We can't just go out and say, give us more money. We have to say, what is that money going to buy us in our community? And if I can just take a minute, these two folks right here, they're my parents. And my mom has been volunteering at the Bremerton Food Line for over 30 years, every Tuesday. And both of them are why I'm here today. Can I get the next slide? So we talked a little bit, this kind of blends, should our community look at alternative funding sources? I know we talked on that a little bit, but are there any other thoughts on how we can bring additional funding to our community? Yes.
I think that looking at tax levies and sales tax levies is an interesting idea. I think it's going to be a hard sell, but there are other alternatives. There are plenty of needs in the county where industry can be developed that would support the homelessness, support the reintegration of homeless folks, pay for the shelters, and I think that a little broader view of perhaps a market solution could be used.
So, Mark, are you going to be at this meeting that's going to happen before June 1st? Because these are the kind of creative solutions. We need these new voices, not just the housing providers.
The Kitsap Resiliency Project is working on exactly that.
Perfect.
So, yes, I will.
Great. Good to hear. Yes.
Get involved with the Budget and Policy Center. They have a little one-day conference in December, or join All In Washington. There are 694 corporate tax loopholes that could fully fund education in all these social service programs.
Okay, give me a second here to get over here.
We're seeing a lot of people come from outside Kitsap County, and I was raised here and lived most of my life here. And I'll give you an example. Up in Kingston, they have a plot of ground that is all treed in the inner city of Kingston, and they have a brothel developer that's doing their first development in Kitsap County. There they have some homeless people that live there. They're going to build 140 townhomes there. They haven't said what the price of those are going to be, but I know from a background in real estate, they're not going to be affordable housing. When I asked them if they were going to have any affordable housing or if they were going to do anything for the homeless people that they are basically evicting from where they're living, they didn't have anything to say about that. It is possible to pass ordinances that require a certain percentage of units to be affordable. These people are making money here in Kitsap County, taking it home to King County. Same thing with the house flipping. If you look at the rent of the houses, the properties that are being sold, the house flippers are coming from outside Kitsap County, buying them up before anybody here can buy them and stuff, and the profits are all going outside. So we need to do something from all these people that are, basically taking the money out of the county and have something where they have to do something to give back to the county.
Thank you. That's a great suggestion. Okay. Next one. So some of this is overlapping. How can we incentivize the investment in new affordable housing? We heard, like as part of your development that you allocate a certain number of units, but there is somebody, I'm going to try and work my way back here. All right. Here we go.
Kind of for all your questions, including this one. I mean, we're here in a church, and I think volunteering is the kind of thing churches do, help feed the hungry and so forth. But I think what you brought up is advocacy. Advocacy can be something that groups of people stand up and say. And for organizations like churches, it's not like who you elect, not a particular political party, but we can say, doing something about homeless is important, and we can say that as institution and as groups of people, not just as individuals.
Yeah. Mayor Wheeler here as well. Thank you.
All right, so I have a few ideas. So, okay, well said, sir. So, something I've already been working on, my administration, is the incentive, putting the permit process into warp speed. And there's 3,500 new units coming on the market in Bremerton, and we've accelerated the process as far as getting them out into the public and back into the folks who will either be purchasing them or renting them out. And while we can't guarantee those will be considered affordable, one of the main tenets for attacking affordability is you increase your supply above the demand. That's your basic market, market theory that we go by. But there are some things, though. If we get the housing out there, there's some other things. So there's something called inclusionary zoning that we will keep looking at. Now, right now in Bremerton, we don't have folks that are testing or pushing the market limits we have already. So there's not enough incentive to develop and exceed what we already offer. So, but it will happen. I believe we're heading that way. So once we start getting that pressure, we can start saying, okay, you can go up 2 more stories if you set aside 20% of your units for affordable housing. You know, there's another program that I'll be rolling out to our city council, and it's called an infill development toolkit. This will allow some flexibility, and I'll be asking for our authority for our director to make some site determinations where we could possibly add an ADU unit where one may just not fit in most circumstances based on the site. We could also create a duplex where there's a single family home based on the site if the situation warrants it. So there's a lot of tools that we're working on, and there's one other one I will be rolling out myself with my staff's help to our city council, and it's a weatherization program. We've already found funding to kickstart or accelerate what we already have, what KCR already does. But this will be a formula that with all the new construction that we're pushing out, permitting, when you accelerate your permitting, you increase your volume, you increase your construction dollars that come back to the city. I'm going to ask the council for a portion of that to be set aside for a weatherization program. What this does is a landlord can access it, or if they income qualify, make improvements on their energy systems inside the house that lowers the energy bill. They agree to do this. They keep the rent stable where it is. It's a way of kind of getting a voluntary program in place where the rents can be stabilized. Somebody can get some relief over maybe a 5-year period. So this will be coming out this year also. Just wanted to respond to some of these things going on.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I think one of the things we can do by way of advocacy, too, is to support our elected officials that are taking on some of these difficult issues and show up at city council meetings. Let's create a groundswell that says we want affordable housing in this community, that we want homelessness to be addressed in this community. Next one. So what have I missed? What kind of creative ideas that go beyond just advocacy and some of the investments? Is there anything else that you think that the homeless housing plan should be thinking about? Because we will take your feedback back to the county. Yes. Wait for me over there.
Yeah, just had a suggestion that we can make a dent in the problem of new homelessness by putting more resources in the hands of organizations such as the Habitat for Humanity and the Kitsap Rescue Mission and the Salvation Army. Now, the Salvation Army, even though they're not doing their homeless shelter program right now, they're still serving the homeless people in a lot of other ways, such as feeding them and having a clothing bank and a food bank down on the premises. So by getting more resources in the hands of those organizations, we're alleviating the problem a little bit.
Thank you. You raised a really important point, and as I walk up here to the front again, I'm going to ask anyone who is a service provider in our community or who is doing the frontline work of case management, anything like that, please take a stand. Please stand up. Everyone. Look around. These are the heroes in our community. These are the heroes in our community. So what's happening next with the homeless housing plan? Next page. It's going to be released for public comment. There's a study session with the Board of Commissioners on May 9th, and there's a public hearing and adoption on May 14th. Please make a note of those dates, because there'll be an opportunity for public comment, and it'd be great for your comments to be heard. We like the way the plan looks. I don't think it's going to be that controversial, but we need to start making affordable housing and homelessness part of every city council, county commissioners meeting. We have to raise the level of awareness so that there are no more students that sleep in the car. Can I hear that? No more students sleep in the car in Kitsap County. No more 61-year-old men die of exposure in Kitsap County. No more people who are living with mental illness and substance use disorders that are undiagnosed being blamed and not deemed worthy of housing. Not again in Kitsap County. You know, we've heard it said, but think about this. But for the grace of God, there goes my mother, my father. There, but for the grace of God, goes my sister, my brother. There, but for the grace of God, goes my son and my daughter. There, but for the grace of God, go I. And so, thank you so much for being part of this. If I could get the next slide up here. We can't accept homelessness as a situation that we can't solve, because the answer to homelessness is housing, and we can do that. And next. And this is Kirsten's favorite quote, which is so true. Everybody does better when everybody does better. And I just give me 1 second here, and I will bring it back to you. The stories that lead people to homelessness, the families that have lost loved ones to homelessness, let's hold them in our heart right now, and hold them in our heart this week and this month and this year, so that we continue to keep this issue at the forefront. And with that, I'll give you the final word, sir. Yes, sir.
Everyone who's here today obviously came here because they wanted to do something about this issue. And, but what I really think we need to do is we need to look past this group, because this is where our mindset is. We need to make sure that we destigmatize homelessness and what makes people homeless in our community. And a few years ago, Seattle did a thing where they put banners up, and I don't know whether anybody remembers it. But like on one side of the banner would say, I own 3 homes and a vacation home. And you look on the other side and it would say, I am homeless. And we need to do, because it's not us. I mean, I'm not saying that we're going to fix everything, which we're not. But we need to get this awareness out to the entire community, to destigmatize it, so that, because if we don't do that, we won't get the monies that we need to get for these programs and everything. We have to start there. So it's really important.
Thank you very much. I think that's a great way to end this conversation. And before you get up and leave, I just want to remind you of one request: to take that name tag and put it on one of these sheets of paper. Where are the sheets of paper? In the back, over there, there's one there. And write your email and your name on that, so that you can be alerted to the next meeting of this group, and bring your ideas that you're going to come up with between now and then, so that we can work together to solve this problem. Thank you so much.
Wow, one more round of applause for Monica. All right. So we wanted to say thank you so much for coming. We've got a couple of other things. If you do have to go, we understand we're at our time limit, but a couple of other items. We have the word cloud that we've created. Is that finished? Do we have the word cloud ready to go? Okay. And we're going to show this here. So this is the initial word cloud. As you can see, sad, cold, need. These are the words that came to mind when you walked in the door today. That transitioned. Let's see the next word cloud. Right next door. Interesting transition there. Need, unfair, housing, solvable, complicated, solutions, community. There's a lot there. There's a lot. It seems like there's a lot more information there in the second one. Not more specific words. I'm just seeing this for the first time as well, so I'm doing my best. But we had one more person. Thank you, Mayor Wheeler, for offering your thoughts as well. Commissioner Charlotte Garrido is here today, and she'd like to say a couple words before we wrap up. And then, yeah.
Good afternoon. It's so wonderful to see all of you and to have heard such great speakers. I just wanted to pop in with a couple of words because we've heard lots of things today about what can be done, what each of us could be doing, what we as groups could be doing. But Monica and I just spent a few days at the Housing First conference in Denver and just got back day before yesterday. And I think both of us are pretty jazzed. I can't match Monica's energy at presentation, but I just want you to know that the Board of County Commissioners does have an ordinance that does allow accessory dwelling units. We started with having it be for temporary emergency housing, knowing that we really need to create ways to have housing to meet needs that exist today and make it happen fast. So I just have to tell you, it's been a much slower process than I ever dreamt that it would be. We pulled together what's called the Continuum of Care. I think it's got a different name now, but it's a Continuum of Care made up of about 45 human services organizations in Kitsap County. We had a summit in 2016 to talk about what we can do here in this community. We have a plan. And we have had a plan. How do we make something happen with that plan? And the League of Women Voters facilitated some fabulous conversations that day. And we came up with the idea that it would be pretty easy maybe to do boarding houses and tiny houses. So the mayor of Paulsbo has already created a boarding house in Paulsbo out of a building that they already owned. And then we have, because I represent most directly South Kitsap, South Kitsap has built 12 tiny houses so far. Primarily, the churches have come together. It's been a great community building opportunity because they have done this, most of them in a parking lot where people can drive by and see and ask questions and look at what this looks like. It has been very difficult to locate property to place those houses on. But I'm happy to say that I got 2 phone calls while I was returning home from the Housing First conference. One was from a property owner who said, I think we can probably allow that. Let's get together and talk about a lease, at least a 2-year lease, to be able to place those houses and the central location, the kitchen and the community bathrooms that need to be there. And then I got a second phone call from a church who's been thinking about and researching, and they will continue their research for another couple of months, but they believe that that's a high possibility. So that's 2 in South Kitsap. That means we need to build some more houses. What do you think? So again, I'm delighted to see each of you. I really loved the questions and the suggestions that I've heard. Yes, each one person in this room and out beyond this room can do something. Just something. And together, we can do even more. So stay in touch with one another. And thank you, West Sound for Social Justice, for putting this together. We have lots of good folks, lots of good organizations, lots of good energy in Kitsap County. Let's make something happen so those people who have no home can have a decent place to live. Because we can do that, and together we owe that to them. Housing, a home, is actually a human right. Let's make it happen.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Commissioner Garrido. I just want to say thank you to everybody for, again, coming this afternoon. Very powerful discussion occurred on many occasions at this table here. But Bob Garrison with West Sound for Social Justice would like to say a few words to close out.
Well, I want to thank the tremendous panelists, all the people who worked to put this together. I'm not going to use or apply anyway the phrase mission accomplished because it's not accomplished. However, I will say that substantial progress was made on the mission. And I know that I came here and got what I was hoping to get. I moved from tears to note-taking about what else do I need to learn, because truly I didn't know as much as most of you probably do. What can I do? Where can I go to learn more? Where can I go to learn what I can most effectively do? And I was left with the thought, everyone is my brother or my sister. Everyone deserves a home. Thank you for coming.